and say welcome to the Tuesday night Pau Hana here at First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. As many of you know, I'm TJ Fitzgerald. I'm the minister here, and we're very happy to be here together again. This is a weekly chance for us to check in with some of the stuff going on around us. As people know, we've had concerts, we've had trivia nights, and lately we've also been having some local folks talking about what's going on with them in their world, in particular folks doing some work in areas of social justice. And tonight I want to introduce everyone to one of my best friends and someone who does a lot of the work that I get involved with. Actually, we cross paths a lot in justice world and in other worlds. And for those of you who don't know him, I just want to introduce Kevin Landers to say hi, and he will be our guest for today. This is Kevin. Hi, Kevin. It's good to see you.
Hello, gang.
Hi.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Good. So one of the things my congregation knows about most recently is that you and I were together, or I was explaining that some of the work I do is with folks in the migration process, and that lately I had the experience of, kind of sticking it to ice a little bit and waiting them out and waiting to get someone out of detention. And what people may not know is that the Hawaii Community Bail Fund was a huge part of making sure that bail was posted. And that was one of the things that made me think about introducing you to my congregation. And my first question is, can you just tell us a bit about the Hawaii Community Bail Fund, how it started, and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, sure. So I could be long-winded on the backstory, so I'll try and pare it down. But there is lots of pretty cool backstory about the specific question. Just to quickly just kind of contextualize the conversation and this work that we're doing at the Hawaii Community Bail Fund. I am a settler in what is contemporarily known as the United States. I'm from the metropolitan greater New York City area, and here a settler, a Holly white settler here in Hawaii. Very lucky to be welcomed and have found a way to make a life here in Hawaii for the past 13 or so years, and feel very committed to living in Hawaii in the context that Hawaii political and under duress that Hawaii is here in the 21st century. I also just wanted to throw it out there, a couple just ways to set what I'm about to say. First of all, TJ, thanks for, gang, is TJ, is being an excellent interviewer, on, the resumes that you review in your congregation? I don't think that's one of the qualifiers, but really, really awesome conversations and great questions and conversations. So just salute, TJ, really, really cool. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And it's not surprising, because I've had these types of conversations with you plenty of times before. So that context to the context, the Hawaii Community Bail Fund comes out of the people may be familiar with in the US political context, this contemporary socialist enthusiasm, basically, with the accelerated slide towards fascism that the United States electoral political system is experiencing over the past 4 years or so. Lots of folks say, you know what, what is the Democratic Party doing? We need something else. We need to have a different basis from which we fight this type of stuff. And a lot of folks are turning towards what I think is very centrist, very middle of the road, very American democratic socialist ideals. The organization that kind of experienced the most rapid growth over the past 4 years is the Democratic Socialists of America. We started a chapter in Hawaii and conscientiously chose to drop the A because of the military occupation here in Hawaii, and it's called the Democratic Socialists of Honolulu. Part of the platform of the organization more broadly, and our chapter includes an abolitionist platform more broadly, the abolition of the carceral state, right? Punitive carceral framework that we exist in. And one of these things, like, we're not, first of all, I definitely speak for myself, but I'm comfortable speaking for the folks that I have done some work with from DSH. We're not claiming to have invented any of this stuff. Like, nowadays, because of the internet, it's beautiful. You can just plug and play, right? And one of the ideas was, like, one of the things we could do is start a bail fund. And this goes back 4 years ago or so. And the community bail fund model comes from New York, the Bronx Defenders, the Brooklyn Bail Fund. And it was just this idea that, like, hey, legally, anybody can post bail for someone else, and money bail is so egregiously counterproductive, unconstitutional, regressive, disproportionately affecting poor people and impacted communities otherwise, right? And all the data supports this. And it's the on-ramp to mass incarceration. So I know we're in good company here, so I won't recount the whole history of everything, but mass incarceration and the abolitionist framework definitely looks like the kind of the simplest, easiest way to address this at the root is bailing people out of jail who do not belong there. They're not a danger to the community, and all them being held in a cage without due process, all it's going to do is ruin their lives and make them turn to more desperation, more pain, and exacerbate the problems that maybe amounted to them coming across the state violence in the first place. So we just replicated the model. There's an organization that grew out of the bail fund work in New York called the National Bail Fund Network. We reached out to them. We said, hey, we want to start a bail fund. What do we do? They gave us a very simple step-by-step instructions, and put one foot in front of the other and made the thing exist, right? Like, first things first, it's got to exist. We can't be worried about, like, well, how are we going to this? How are we going to that? Like, let's just make the thing exist. We successfully did that. And one interesting part of the formation was to 501c3 or not to 501c3. That is the question. So we're in these abolitionist circles, and the Democratic Socialists of Honolulu actually has a pretty fair reputation as a little bit more radical, a little bit more, has more of an intersectional analysis, embodies more of these, like, abolitionist principles, rather than what I think on a national political scale, the Democratic Socialist stuff is pretty middle of the road, pretty FDR-like, we said, heck, like, do we want to get caught up in the whole nonprofit industrial complex? Are we going to have, like, paid employees who then need to, like, create work for themselves, and then we get caught up in a patriarchal or capitalist productivity mindset? The most beautiful happenstance of this formation of this bail fund was the Mauna Kea protectors ramping up in, I guess that was like somewhere around January 2019, where some of our other work, we were invited to talk about some of this planning, like legal observation, non-violent direct action planning, logistical planning, stuff like that. And it was like, hey, there's this bail fund that's in the process of being formed, and we're going to need a bail operation. And so that was beautiful, because first it contextualized, like, what are we doing? Like, the most impacted communities need to be centered and need to be making the decisions about this. And that was, like, the biggest, most profound way to, like, stamp the organization and the principles that it was built around, with that. Because, like, I am a mediocre white guy. I don't even think of myself as an organizer. I don't think of myself as an activist. I think of myself as active. And rather than an organizer, I think of myself as a participant. So an active participant in these types of things. But when a bunch of like Hawaiian women are like doing the work and the wisdom and the spirit that comes with that, it's like, shoots, like, I don't want to dump labor on like, impacted communities, but I'm like, hey, you got marching orders? Like, you don't have to do any labor. I'll just go do it. Like, what needs to be done? What are we going to do? And that's pretty much what happened. And so I'll wrap this up with just the work that the Hawaii Community Bail Fund has done. By and large, the majority of it has been supporting nonviolent direct action that Hawaiians have been leading and organizing around Mauna Kea and around Kahuku and Hunananiho in Waimanalo, but the gift of the protectors, the gift of Mauna Kea, the gift of Hawaiians in Hawaii is this stable, healthy fund that can do work like when through organic referral seeking. I mean, we're not even seeking, right? It's from the community. It comes from the grassroots. It comes from the people who are doing this work, the people who are contributing to an abolitionist foundation or a legal or just future for Hawaii and the settler state, the de facto state. And we came across this referral that actually, didn't have anything to do with kind of the more typical community bail fund work, but he was held on immigration bond. But, it fit our criteria. We're not like drinking out of a fire hose and picking and choosing. Like, for me, that would just be so like playing God, like a white man. Like, I would just be perpetuating white supremacy and patriarchy if that's what we were doing. But when it comes from the community and it's just such a logical fit, and it's like, can you guys do this? Yeah, we can. We get to have the experience that we had with a person that was freed from immigration detention last month. So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah. So there's first, thank you for that very clear and beautiful explanation. The word that keeps coming up that I love, because we don't hear it enough, is abolitionist. And I guess my question is, how does it feel or when did you decide, or tell me about taking on the mantle or the moniker of abolition and abolitionist, and when you decided to do that, how it feels and what it does for you? I'm curious.
That's a great question. So I think in general, I mean, it's maybe fair that a lot of folks hear the word abolition and they, immediately think of the abolition of slavery, which is true. And what's profound for me, and I don't know where it happened exactly, excuse me, maybe like reading Angela Davis, like maybe she used the term, but I think that what I'm more certain of is when it was solidified, when mass incarceration as articulated by the new Jim Crow and like talked about in this way, where abolition in the contemporary like use drew a line directly back to the abolitionist movement in terms of chattel slavery, where it became, I was educated to the point of realizing that there is a direct line from chattel slavery in the United States to the cash bail practice today under mass incarceration. And so like that think the author is it Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow? So like that arc really kind of, for me, I think made me self-identify and like use the term more readily. Hopefully that's an answer to the
Does
question.
just I have this image of people starting to go around in coffee shops or wherever when those open again, when someone says, "Well, you know, I go to this church or I play tennis and I also am an abolitionist." And the way that the identity of taking on that identity and the power of just saying this is part of who I am, like hearing you just speak about it as, yeah, this is just part of who I am, is almost like a freedom, and giving other people permission to say that, you know. And I think that it has a very powerful impact. At least it was having one on me in real time as you were using the word. So I guess I'm just sharing my own experience, but that was one of the things that I just wanted to kind of point out. And everyone on this call is welcome to start calling themselves an abolitionist if they mean it. But yeah, so that was one of the things I was kind of thinking about. And then also, you know, one of the things I try to get into is where, you know, I mean, did you just, is partly the story behind you, like where you started to get to this? And I know you talked about some of your education. I mean, Michelle Alexander's book, as far as I know, came out about 12 years ago, I want to say, something like that, and sort of caught on after that. But I know there's some hands up, and we're going to get to those questions in a second. But if you could take us back a little bit for yourself of what brought you to, as you say, participating in work that is ending and trying to get out of, you know, these modes that, whether it's, you know, the white supremacy culture that we live in, whether it is, you know, the capitalist, you know, scheme that we're under, or regime, however you look at it. Was there a turning point for you, or was this gradual? Can you say something about like the process from Kevin, who I know, who's, you know, from Long Island, to Kevin in Hawaii? Was there someone in the middle, or was it when you were here? Can you do some of that for us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that the most important thing I have to say about my own political education, if you will, or political consciousness awakening, is that I just don't deserve any credit. I didn't seek anything out. I have brilliant older siblings. I have brilliant, loving parents who I just feel, by example and in explicit lessons and teaching and encouragement, gave me principles, right? Like a principled existence, I think, is the most important thing that I got from as long as I can remember. And I honor my ancestors. You know, I don't know if any of my ancestors were revolutionaries in Ireland or communists in Ireland or what, but I do know that as settlers in the United States, you know, my paternal grandfather worked with the young Catholic workers. He also, you know, was like, I think like forming the teachers union in New York City. There's a great uncle who's some civil rights lawyer. A lot of this is in my blood, I feel like, and I know this is like this is a faith community, so I don't know if it's something that's commonly understood, and I'm no expert on it, but the Jesuit tradition, right? The Catholic Jesuit education that my father got was, you know, and I think of Dorothy Day, and that again, formative, right? It being intergenerational in one way, form, or another. And I mean, just like one of the most like prominent memories of my father, and when I talk about principle, like my father always saying to me, like, there wasn't any like Marxist analysis that came out of his mouth, but there was, you know, the problem is that we as a society identify with the rich rather than identifying with the poor. And if we could identify with the poor first, and that's like something that we like, that's like this new like class consciousness that I hope is like on fire in this country, where it's like, we're all way closer to being houseless than we are a billionaire. That's a fact. And we should align ourselves appropriately, and like, just experiencing lots of layers of privilege, right? As a white male in the orbit of the epicenter of capitalism and all of the beautiful privileges that were afforded to me by my parents. And I think then their privilege, but as well the principles that they lived their lives by, and but also the trauma that my parents experienced and then looked at and worked on, which then yet again, like, so I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Because of the privilege that I was born into, but then also the work that my parents did that I really feel like set me off on a lifetime of interrogating white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy. So I think does that answer? Yeah.
It does. Liz has her hand up, and so I'm going to spotlight her and ask her to unmute herself and see if she will ask her question.
Aloha, Kevin. Mahalo for spending time with us and talking about your program.
Aloha.
And your passion, and for the work that you do for our Kanaka Maoli, the people whose islands these belong to. I'm so curious about who in the Hawaiian community, who are the leaders that you're working with the Hawaiian Bail Fund. I'm so curious to know who influences your work and leads this effort with you. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for the question. I think that I want to hedge a little bit here, because something that's important about the Hawaii Community Bail Fund is it's not without controversy. There have been, legal obstacles to community bail funds doing their work around the country. And even here, the protectors of Mauna Kea, you may be familiar with the news story about the Attorney General going after Kahea, the Hawaiian Environmental Alliance, a nonprofit legal organization, does incredible work, and they were participating in the organization of the protectors at Mauna Kea. And funny that kind of the biggest story about how the Hawaii de facto state attorney general was going after Kahea was on the topic of bail. One of the accusations was that they were paying bail, and they weren't allowed to do that per their bylaws or their mission statement as a 501c3. So that's just a little context for the fact that I don't know that it's fully my place to disclose the identities. What I'd like to articulate is this was by design, that myself and two other Haole settlers formally are responsible legally, where should the state, want to do an audit or see if we're cooking the books or whatever, that legally it would fall on us. And this is really probably the most important part of the organization of this fund. I mentioned trying to avoid the pitfalls of the nonprofit industrial complex, all of the hoops that you got to jump through just to be able to legitimize the work that one's doing with the IRS, with, forgive me, the bourgeois liberal class who, has lots of money to give to this type of work. But the decision-making, what I also mentioned, centering impacted communities, the po'o, or the collective head of the organization. The decision-making body is 4 Kanaka Maoli, 3 of which are women, and 1 non-binary person of color. All of which, you know, we've got everything from lawyers with OHA to former politicians to people that kind of fit a profile more like myself as an individual, having an experience with incarceration, and you know, feeling really lucky and fortunate to have escaped you know, the system, and trying to do good work to help others not get absorbed and swallowed up by the system. Yeah, I mean, I think that if that's, I hope that I described that well enough, and it's not, I hope it feels appropriate and respectful to those individuals. They identify themselves as, you know, organizing with the Hawaii Community Bail Fund, but I don't feel that it's my place. I hope that is clear and respectful to your question.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And I want to talk about this for days, but I also want to talk about some of the other things that that you're doing. But before I move to those and ask some other questions, I know people want to know, is there a way to help or support, or what's going on with the bail fund? What are the needs? Are they legislative? Are they like legislative contact centered? Are they simply cash centered? And if so, like, what are maybe the 1 or 2 most effective ways that you could use help right now?
Thanks for that. That's a great reminder, because the fund is financially very healthy. So we're not spending a lot of time and resources trying to fundraise, but ultimately money is what enables this work. So folks want to make a tax deductible donation to a nonprofit organization. The Hawaii Community Bail Fund, you know, it welcomes the financial support always, and we're just able to more easily come to decisions like, you know, this immigration detention bond was not small. It was by far the biggest single form of financial support that we've done just yet. So money always helps. That's for sure. But what I also want to make clear is that currently, and this will not change until the impacted communities, Hawaiians, determine that what is desired to be done with this community fund is to adopt a more traditional nonprofit structure where there are paid employees who have specific work to do, and then everything that comes with that, right? Productivity. What are our goals? What are we going to do, right? And I remain agnostic on this, right? If I felt like it should be one way or the other, again, I would be perpetuating white supremacy and patriarchy. So that day may come, but as it is so far, there are no paid employees. In fact, the only thing that the money in the Hawaii Community Bail Fund does is it goes towards bailing people out of jail. Small expenses, having a phone, website hosting, stuff like that, is handled by individuals who are volunteers like myself, and we just that's our financial contribution to the fund's work, is making sure that the very, very small amount of administrative costs is taken care of and segregated, so all the money that people donate goes towards bailing people out of jail. So the real answer to the question is our community has a person who needs to be bailed out of jail and fits some really, wide criteria, and wants to go actually bail them out of jail. And this is where the mutual aid aspect comes in, right? People say, well, if you don't have any paid employees, how's this work getting done? How's anybody going to ever get anything done? And that is mutual aid. That is right. And in a faith community, I won't have to sell this very hard. When I take time out of my day and I go serve people who are more vulnerable than I am, I get more out of it than they ever will, right? Anybody could just come and, bail them out of jail and whatever. It is a privilege. I heal, right? The inner work that I need, the healing and the recovery that I need as a beneficiary of systems of hierarchy and domination under capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. I need to heal. I need to do that work. And, that's what people can do. People can, whether it be being involved in impacted communities where a referral will come up, helping the houseless, people with mental illness, addiction issues, doing that kind of work will then put individuals in contact with folks who then could use this kind of small cash bail for these ridiculous penalties that they're held in cages for, waiting for their day in court. That's it, right? It's like volunteering is very simple. It's like, hey, I have someone who needs to be bailed out. Great. Are you willing to bail them out? And the fund can say, here's what you need to look for. Here's how you do it. Here's very simple set of instructions of how to bail someone out of jail. And we'll even provide the money. So all it is, people who have time and bandwidth and then referrals, right? Referrals that come from community. We don't want to just be taking referrals from like the public defender's office, right? And this is where these nested systemic forms of disproportionality come from, I think, in the first place. So we don't want to be relying on just, a state agency for where the referrals come from. So hopefully that answers the question, but reach out to us, info@hawaiicommunitybailfund.org. People could reach out to me directly as well. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, just as one of the, just from my own experience, not just as the minister on the call, but yeah, truly that the thimble full of sort of time that it takes folks, obviously, and also folks who are used to navigating, frankly, just paperwork, and who walk into spaces unafraid of their own liberty and freedom. It's an enormous tool, enormous, that I don't even fully comprehend. That I walk in a collar with a law degree to a place, I'm not afraid at all, and so it's like, and if you're someone who's used to navigating those places, that is something that privilege has given me, and now I can use it. It's my privilege to use it in a way that benefits someone else entirely, and the good that comes to me from doing that is profound, and is part of redeeming some of it, to use a churchy word, of what we've been given. So, and frankly, if you just know how to fill out paperwork, not a lot of people can do that. And if you're good at it, bailing people out is important, because there's a lot of instructions and things you follow, things like that. Good. We're going to move to something else. I want to get to some other things, but I have a really good question here from Lee. Kevin, do you think the upcoming Honolulu prosecutors race has the opportunity for making dramatic changes in the criminal justice system? I want to say, from a constitutional law perspective, I don't believe that you, who is not a church member, opining on a race is going to impact our church community in any way. So please speak freely, openly about what you're thinking about the upcoming prosecutors race.
Cool. Thanks for the question. It's great, right? It's pretty exciting. This sort of like awakening of like, wait a minute, we elect prosecutors, and they're how powerful? Like, yeah. Wait a minute, what? Like, this is like one of the, as you've got reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms. And I am very skeptical of electoral politics in the United States in general. I don't want to get too off on a tangent with that, but I mean, the answer is yes. Like, we are seeing meaningful change happen around the country where these prosecutors who are just a bare minimum of humane, like none of it is radical. Like this whole idea, like, oh, you're a socialist, you're an abolitionist, like it's compared to the rest of the world, like it's just sane. It's like even from like a liberal perspective or Democrat, a capital D Democratic perspective, it's like it's just efficacy. It's like none of this stuff works. None of this stuff makes us safer. This isn't good for our budgets. Like it's not good for anything except exacerbating racial capitalism and for-profit incarceration businesses. You know what I mean? So the answer is definitely yes. From me as an individual, I also 501c3 Hawaii Community Bail Fund has no opinion on political anything, right? And I also don't speak for Democratic Socialists of Honolulu, but just as an individual, there is a candidate, Jackie Esser, who very much fits the profile of this like new way of having a leadership in the prosecutor's office. She is compassionate. She's informed of how the system works. I mean, I guess you have to be. There's some minimum qualification even to run for prosecutor, I'm pretty sure. But let me also say that like politics, especially in like this like capitalist political economy that we live in, it by nature excludes someone who just is principled, who just wants to treat human beings humanely and fairly, right? And this is not a criticism of Jackie, this is a criticism of the system. And so on the one hand, I don't know how much can be done in one fell swoop, but we're seeing around the country prosecutors get elected and using their insane amount of like almost like unilateral power to do real reformist reforms type of good, and I hope that that's what we have in store for us here.
Good, thanks for that, Kevin. There is a question. We did talk a little bit about abolitionists already, David, and I see your question, and we'll get to carceral, but we got about 20 minutes left, and there's a few other things I want to touch on. Quickly, Kevin, do you want to just talk about, I'm assuming carceral in the sense you mean is just like, is the adjective for incarceration or describing things related to incarceration. So carceral is what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What I wanted to move to is something that's very exciting and also timely right now that I've been noticing. There's been a lot of shifts in the way landlords are working with tenants and the way tenants are working and laboring or not right now in order to handle some of their expenses. And some of the stuff you've been involved with is this tenants union. And I'm not sure how many people have really even heard about this, but if you could start to say a few words about how this got started and what it is, that would be a direction I'd like to move, if that's all right.
Yeah, cool. I mean, the Honolulu Tenants Union is like, what an inspiring group of people because of the time. It's really kind of this beautiful experience of like, with the bail fund, like, well, it's this like really kind of easy, just make the thing exist, like on ramp into like we need to have that here. It just needs to exist in Hawaii. Similarly, and so then the thing exists, and then a few months later, our accomplices in the Hawaiian community are like, well, here you go, like, no talk heavy, you want to do something, like, here we go. And the timing was just serendipitous. Very much the same thing with this tenants union. It's like, people just
starting things. Every time you start something, there becomes a tragedy that it's needed for. So anyway.
Well, I've been along for the ride. I am not responsible for starting either of these things, but the serendipity is like, I got to admit, if anything, like, is like, for me as an individual, is definitely like, I trying to be in a place and a time that could end up with some likelihood of being the right place at the right time is kind of like the way that I approach life. And that is really satisfying, knowing like, all right, you know, we live in this era of accelerated fascism, and the answer to fascism, the only thing that beats fascism is socialism. And that feels really good. Like when we're doing this kind of work, and then if we create something just like, hey, we don't know what we're doing, we just got to make this thing exist, and then a few months later the crisis comes where it's like, we got to organize around housing, and they look, and you know, like, forgive me if any, I don't want to offend anybody with saying Democrats or whatever, but like, you know, we're in good company, we're all on the same side, right? It's like, what's it like? There's no democratic solution. Like, these neoliberal market-based solutions, like that is the problem in our view. So when, you know, like the crisis happens, and maybe some, you know, Joe Biden is talking about like rent freedom or rent cancellation or something like that. That's a response, right? When you have a critical analysis of capitalism, the thing, we see it coming, and that's what feels like good. Like, it's like, this is the work we need to be doing, right? Capitalism is the problem. It systemically will create crises like these, and so it feels encouraging. We're also still very much, I mean, the United States, or in Hawaii, in a political sense, like, just voices in the wilderness. Like, it's just, you know, like, there's good people who get it and understand, but then it comes down to like, well, but that's not reasonable. So we got to get stuff done. And the way to get stuff done is in the legislature or whatever. And that's great. And I respect the work that those folks do, but we need both. We need an all and above approach, and like figuring out how to organize and create economic democracy, or at least advocating for economic democracy or any kind of real democracy in the way that we distribute resources in our society. It's like, it feels encouraging. It feels like we're doing something right when a crisis happens right after something is formed. And so the Honolulu Tenants Union, and we're just getting started, because the economic impact of this pandemic is yet to be fully felt, right? And like, housing security is, I mean, talk about the most impacted, you know, like where women carry the burdens of our entire society, with domestic work and child rearing, and like the devastation that like some amount of housing security being taken away, and for that to be happening to Hawaiians in their ancestral homeland, like, is just, I mean, I know we're in good company, but it's just so reprehensible that when a market-based solution is talked about, it's, I gotta admit, it makes me a little bit pessimistic that the solutions might not, you know, come in an organized or orderly fashion. And we want to advocate, you know, for people power, right? The power of organized workers, renters, people who are just surviving, is profound. And this country doesn't have a voice that represents that, or really any large scale organizations that represent that, in my opinion. So the Honolulu Tenants Union's work is just getting started.
But so what, I mean, imagine there's just one person on this call who's sitting here thinking, oh my God, am I the only person who doesn't know what a tenants union is? I don't want to ask the question. So can you answer that one person, or maybe that person isn't even here, but answer that one person's question? What is a tenants union and what does it do?
So the first thing that we are doing and that we want to do is be able to provide good resources for folks who don't even know what their rights are. what their recourse is. I mean, there are evictions happening right now. They're just off the books because the governor's, declaration means that evictions can't happen. But that's just because, the courts, can't provide an eviction notice. But I mean, we live in a world where the most vulnerable of us, like those are the people who are exploited and preyed upon, right? Like, a slumlord, right? Like doesn't even need to hide information from renters. Like as a society, like we do such a poor job, even with the minimal protections that are even provided to renters, we do such a poor job of making it known, let alone enforced. So kind of the first thing that we got to do is be a resource. So folks, want to know, what are my rights right now? Well, we hope that can come out of that small amount of solidarity is, if it doesn't have to be a rent strike, it doesn't have to be nonviolent direct action, 30 people showing up to an eviction and preventing it from happening. I mean, landlords having some amount of pushback, knowing that the Honolulu Tenants Union exists and what we're trying to do, by itself, like goes back to like the point about the bail fund is like just existing. Like this is where we're at. Like we're so capital dominates every aspect of our life that like something like this doesn't even exist. And there's no state agency that's like devoted to like helping people navigate their rights as renters. So and that's not a complaint necessarily. I'm perfectly happy for the resource that helps renters to exist outside of the state infrastructure. The other thing that we're doing is trying to find good candidates of buildings to organize. We're providing resources. We just did our first mailer, to a bunch of tenants that all have the same landlord, in case they do want to collectively organize. Some sample letters, that say like a formal request to a landlord for rent forgiveness or a rent reduction, these types of things, because, I know with all of my privilege and all of my, mediocre white maleness, walking around in the world, like I'm entitled to everything. Even I know as a renter, it's like, it's scary. It's like, that's right. That's hierarchy. It's like the landlord, it's their house. They make the rules. They call the shots. You don't push uphill on that. Like even I know that, like with all of the, undeserved self-righteousness that someone like me has, it's scary and it's vulnerable. And ultimately, the way that there is no enforcement of the little protections that we have, a landlord could just not like you and say, yeah, you got to move out. So
are you working with Local 5 at all on this?
Oh man, I mean, Local 5, shoot, like Local 5 says jump, I say how high. That's me as an individual, and a lot of the folks with the Democratic Socialists rely on Local 5. We collaborate with them. Right now, because of the pandemic, there hasn't been much collaboration explicitly, like where we could get the most help around like canvassing. Yeah. Right. But as individuals, a bunch of us have done canvassing with Local 5, and yeah, awesome work they do. We're just like want to get in their wake and support what they do anywhere, anyhow.
Which reminds me, I have an email from Paula today that I have to return. So it's good that we were talking about this. You don't like to let Paula's emails go too long without a response. But the last thing I want to kind of turn to, and thank you for explaining all of this. I think it's something that some of our folks can keep an eye out for and be more aware of, is that but then also you're working on Kapuna Care, is that right?
Corona Care, yeah.
Corona Care, yeah.
Yeah. Corona Care is also something that has grown directly out of the Democratic Socialists of Honolulu. It's a mutual aid organization that, the enthusiasm and the energy that went into starting it came from some key organizers and activists with Democratic Socialists of Honolulu, specifically to address the circumstances with the pandemic. So while some of the most dramatic anticipated fallout, we temporarily have seemed to have averted, it's going to be the long tail. It's the most vulnerable, who will feel the impacts the worst, and will have the longest tail. And that's what I love about this group of people, is that they all understand that. So there is no we got to get ramped up to do this and do that. And then when the hockey stick, COVID infection rate, didn't quite happen like that. It wasn't like run for the hills and be, and okay, well, we don't need to do that now. This is also the best way that to be honest, a lot of folks, it seems to have shifted, but originally a lot of folks, with Democratic Socialists of Honolulu, it was a very academic, very haole organization. And, over time, this type of work is what I feel like gives us credibility and relationships. One of my favorite, if it would be an honor if they considered themselves a mentor of mine. I definitely look to them for examples in everything that I do, but Kanaka academic Kahala Johnson and others talk about this metaphor of there's a Hawaiian fishing net, and I believe it's upena, I believe is the word, and how, which for me is my favorite thing, because explicitly non-hierarchical, right? A network, and these relationships, these relations, and these ways that we bind together is something that has been so beautiful and so profound to see over the past 4 years or so with DSH, that the makeup of the participants and the organizers has definitely changed demographically, and this type of mutual aid work, that is the foundation, right? Socialism, especially for millennials who want to be cool on the internet, or want to be edgy or more radical than the next person, or the most woke, great. That's good. I'll take it. It's better than, keeping up with the Kardashians. But the real work, all right, that is what is so inspiring and what ultimately gives me hope. And this mutual aid network, we're just connected with just amazing organizations that we just provide some amount of logistical work. And the big part of it is software. Critical person involved with this is a software developer professionally, and left a job and ended up with this lifetime membership to this help desk software. So what happens is a lot of it's very automated. If someone has a need, they can get assigned according to the need and according to their geography, and get connected with this mutual aid network. Oh, well, we've got this guy, Kevin, in Nuuanu, and all he wants to do is go drive and deliver stuff to people who needs it. You know what I mean? Perfect. That essentially is Corona Care, but the relationships, healthy mothers, healthy babies. I believe that we were connected with them through the Hawaii State Commission on Women, and Affirm Hawaii, transnational feminist organization. And then you got some of the more, the food bank and Lanakila Pacific, and then some businesses La Tour Cafe down on Nimitz. It's just beautiful, just sort of network that Corona Care, there's lots of organizations doing kinds of awesome work like this, but for Corona Care, it's just nurturing these relationships that had existed, and providing this sort of this technological fix to the logistics that kind of makes things a little bit self-serving, or self-organizing. I hope was that clear?
Yeah, It was good, and we're closing in on 7. But I feel like I want to say this not as in any way that should be taken at all that I'm suggesting someone's better than anyone else. But you do all this, and correct me if I'm wrong. You also hold down a quote like an actual job for what you do for capitalism. Is that correct? And you don't need to talk about the job. I'm more just asking. This isn't your full-time gig, right? You do all of these things on your free time. Is that correct?
I do. I don't want to misrepresent it. The accurate representation is I'm a mediocre white guy. So I have a job in alternative energy in sales, right? Just like a bunch of white dudes that like, you know, could be doing anything else, right? Like it's just, that's the world that we live in. But I have a great job. I love the work that I do, but I have a lot of privilege. I have a lot of bandwidth, and I get so much more out of any of this participation than I could ever do as an individual. And I have spent my adult life interrogating what makes me tick and how society trains and programs, especially someone like myself. And there's a lot of deprogramming to do. There's a lot of unraveling for me to do. There's a lot of unlearning to do. There's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of relating that I need to do and this starts to transcend any of the objective descriptions that we've been talking about. It transcends that. I'd say a spiritual practice for me is definitely getting out of self in any of these ways, and I owe my sanity, and I owe every moment of peace that I experience in this life. I owe it to that. So I owe it to the people that I do this type of stuff with, and I do it to the beautiful people that I get to meet. You know what I mean? Like doing this type of stuff, and it makes me feel like the luckiest person in the world.
Well, I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world to call you friend, and I'm so glad you were able to take this time with us and my community I love so much. I hope that folks will, when this goes live and everything, might share it with other people who are interested in ways they can help some of these groups, or not even help, way they can participate, way they can take part in a way that is helpful, not so much maybe for even other people, but for themselves. So thanks, Kevin. Do you want to say goodbye or say anything, any parting thoughts for us before we end the session?
That felt like a nice parting thought. It felt like it wrapped up that way, huh?
All right. Well, I'll edit your comment out then, and we'll take it from there. No, thanks again. I'm going to end the recording, and people can stay and chat for a little bit. So thanks, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Radical.